Hi, everybody. We are back with another one of your questions about work. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And I was so excited when I heard from Anna Marie because we've been friends for a while from like playing werewolf together. Was that how we first met? Maybe it was how we first met. But Anna Marie was a product leader then and has been a product leader at a bunch of companies like Asana and Yammer. I think you were at Yammer maybe where we first met. Coinbase, now Hover. And so when she said, oh, like, I really like this, I'm like, oh, you have lots of stuff to share. And I love this question for today. So today's question is, the reason I love it is it applies to so many situations in life. I'm working at a company and I want to do something. I got, a new startup idea I want to pitch to people. I'm a salesperson. So I've got an idea and I need people to go along with my idea. I want to convince them. I don't just want to throw it out and have it do nothing. How do I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this idea, this question of getting people kind of aligned and on board with ideas all the time, because that's one of kind of the core responsibilities of product people generally. Right. And one of the interesting things is it's like the question here is like, how do I get people to get on board with my idea? But one of the interesting counterintuitive answers there is, I think that the first thing is you have to like let go of that idea, let go of it being your idea and let go of it being like the right idea, because chances are it's probably not, especially if it's your first idea. Because when people, like we have this cognitive kind of tick in humanity, when we feel like we're being pushed in a direction, we push back.
We resist.
And so the worst thing when
you're selling me, I don't want to be sold.
Exactly. And so it causes us to kind of, as humans, just kind of like dig in and be like, no, like you're trying to convince me of something. What are you selling? So one of the first tricks is just to be emotionally willing to like set it aside, and people can sense that. They can really sense if you're willing to be wrong. And if you're coming with something that you think is right, but like you could be wrong about. So I think that's like one of the most important parts.
I love that insight. And I mean, what it makes me think of, we're now hiring, well, we're going to post it soon, but hiring for a job on our team. And so we finally wrote up what we call the AntiSell, which is like, here are all the reasons you should not want to work with us. And part of it is like, I want to try to make an earnest effort to tell somebody, like, I'm not trying to convince you. In fact, I'm trying to unconvince you. But anyway, sorry. Okay. But so you've got that state of like, I can look at this idea from the outside as if I was an observer and I'm holding it lightly. So if somebody else has an improvement, I can shape it. And then what?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take, for example, your team. Let's say you're trying to convince your team of something, or you have an idea and you're like, hey, the first thing you do is you start by posing the idea, like just put it out there and see how people kind of react to it. Because if it's obvious and everyone's like, yes, like, let's do that. Great. No issue. But if people kind of push back and be like, ooh, I'm not sure that's a good idea. One of the first things that you think to do is be like, oh, well, here's why it's a good idea. And you kind of go and put up a defense.
Defend it. You argue.
You defend it. Exactly. And really one of the things that's interesting about ideas is ideas are kind of just this ephemeral thing that comes out of a process and out of a framework. So the process of coming up with an idea is you have something you're trying to accomplish. You have some criteria you're using to evaluate if something will accomplish that. And then you have some inputs and some priors and some assumptions.
Meaning like the idea is, in a sense, the answer to a question that you've posed that has all these different conditions to it. And it's like, and therefore the best thing to do is the light bulb or something like that.
Exactly. And so instead of arguing like, should we, do a light bulb or not, the question becomes like, oh, okay, well, what are we trying to accomplish? So we've had some example of this. I was kind of designing an OKR framework and a goals process to roll out in our organization. And I was, one of my peers who's responsible for some of the rollout in engineering came to me and was like, hey, I think we should add this to our process of OKRs. I think this should be part of how we do OKRs. And I looked at it and I was like, that's actually, it was an extra layer. It was adding more complication. And part of me was like, I don't think I agree with this. But instead of saying like, ooh, I don't think I agree, my first reaction was, what are we trying to accomplish here? Like, what is your goal in adding this to the OKR framework? And his response was, well,
curious, not furious.
Yes, curious, not furious. And starting with like, what's the goal? And the response that he had was, it actually helped me uncover something I didn't know, which is that we had a prior process that included something that was really beneficial to a part of the org that I had no visibility into, which was, one of the teams that does some of the foundations work that has dependencies on some of the upstream product facing teams. And so he was trying to optimize for making sure they got visibility early. And I was like, that's a great thing to optimize for, but do we need to
But here's
optimize for
another
that
way
in
of doing it or something like that.
Exactly. It's not something that should be part of an OKR framework. We agree.
I wish
that,
I were better
actually,
at that, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I often react to the thing, and it's like you hear the negotiation advice of focus on interests, not positions. It seems very related to that. And instead of being like, that sounds dumb, you should be like, what is the reason you are proposing that? And
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then if you are aligned on the same reasons that you're proposing something and you're actually, okay, that makes sense. Then the next thing is like, well, do we agree on how we're going to evaluate if this is good or not? And I've had a lot of, discussions with teammates in product teams where, maybe the designer is trying to prioritize, in one instance, this stands out in my memory very dramatically. The designer was trying to prioritize a particular user type that was coming into the experience after it was set up. And I was trying to prioritize the type of experience for the user who was setting it up in the first place. And so when you choose which of those you're prioritizing, the answer is obvious what you do. So you just kind of like debate the framework of how you're going to evaluate that.
Any other tips and tricks that have worked for you?
I mean, one of the other things that I find is really interesting if you're trying to get people on board in kind of an executive capacity or leadership capacity is think about what is the frame within which you're considering the problem that you're proposing an idea for, and what is the frame that's probably larger that they're thinking about. Because you might have a really awesome idea, but they might be worried about like the site's not standing up. So like, we can't work on your awesome idea. We need reliability. So if you want to pose your idea in the framework of the size of the frame that they're thinking of, which is given the considerations that you're thinking about, which is site reliability and, product viability and all of that, here's how this idea fits into everything you're thinking about. Because leadership will typically they're a little bit allergic to ideas that only stand on their own right when they're taken within a smaller scope than what the whole organization needs to think about.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've found, I mean, you are approaching this from the perspective of, and correct me if you disagree, but from the perspective of like everybody's a rational actor with different goals maybe, but trying to get to the right ideas. And oftentimes it's like, no, like Roy works for that fucking asshole. Everything that fucking asshole does is bad. Therefore, I'm going to kill his idea in the meeting just because of enmity toward that other person. And the reality is a lot of organizational life is about that log rolling of like, well, I remember like, for example, when I started a job once, I was assigned to be responsible for something. I was like, this thing's stupid. We should just shut this down. And I remember going to a meeting with like my boss and being like, this thing's stupid. We should shut it down. And he's like, yeah, thank goodness you said that. I was like, why didn't you just tell me you thought that? Okay, fine. And then we went to a meeting with like his peers. And then the other peers like, well, if you're going to shut down that one, we want to shut down your pet project. I was like, oh, you didn't tell me it was your colleague's pet project, because that makes a huge difference to how the substance unfolds. So there is this element of widening the frame beyond just the substance of the idea or the reason for it to what is the broader set of considerations that person has who you're trying to convince in their calculus. And let me ask you one last thing before we run out of time, which is at the risk of going into dangerous territory, to what extent does it matter in how you think about it if the proposer of the idea is one gender versus another? Or, I mean, both of us are white, and so we can't quite speak for like people of color. But like for me as a white guy, I often feel like there are things that might work for me that might not work as well for others, but maybe that's wrong. I don't know. So I'm just curious how you think about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that I think about there is that there's a lot of evidence that if you pose an idea in a room and you're, for whatever reason, low status, and in a lot of environments, status is a lot of times associated with ethnicity and, gender, all these things. There's a lot of evidence to show that people don't even hear that idea.
Wow.
They don't even process that someone heard that idea. So there's this concept of amplification, which is if you know that this might happen, if you see that happen in the room, then you amplify, you echo, oh, that person had a great idea. And you just say their name and you kind of say that they had that idea. Because if you don't, a lot of times people don't recognize that someone had that idea, but they heard it in their brain somewhere. And so someone else,
they just didn't like consciously process it. But that sounds like good ally behavior.
Exactly. So that's something I think about a lot. And maybe, you have to say things a few times and a little bit louder, but I think that's, go for it. I'm all for it.
And Maria, may I say, I think you have a book in you on this. This is like, I feel like we could have kept going. It's like, wow, 10 minutes just passed. Well, that is then, anything to add before we wrap?
No, I think it's about coming into the conversation with, honesty, genuineness, and developing that trust. And, you can't change everything. Sometimes there's incentives and someone's got a pet project and you got to go with it.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you for that, Tradecraft, and not advice. You're not giving anybody a prescription.
Not advice.
lots of lived experience there. And for folks who are watching, we get these questions from all of you. Even though Anna Marie and I knew each other before, it was like genuine conversation about this. This is not advice that led to this. So thank you for doing this. And I hope we do this again. And you can come on as often as you want, open invitation, and to be continued.